Greetings, my fellow adventurers. It's Elara. Welcome back to our cozy sanctuary, where the echoes of forgotten kingdoms and the whispers of ancient forests come alive in tales of courage and redemption. Tonight, we journey to the once proud kingdom of Edralis, where shadows linger and secrets of the past threaten the present. We follow the footsteps of a brave young prince, Eryndor, as he ventures into the heart of a cursed land to uncover the truth behind his kingdom's despair. So, find your coziest spot. Let the magic of this mythical tale ignite your imagination, and prepare to be swept away into a world of mystery, sacrifice, and hope. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and which tales of adventure you'd love to hear next. Let's begin. The wind carried the scent of autumn through the cobblestone streets of Edralis, a kingdom once revered for its splendor, but now known only for its sorrow. The towers that had once pierced the skies with grandeur were now weathered and cracked, their stones cloaked in ivy and moss. Once busy streets lay quiet, and even the market square, where laughter and lively chatter once reigned, was now reduced to whispers and furtive glances. The very air seemed weighed down, as if the kingdom itself held its breath, bracing against an unseen force. In the heart of the square stood a grand fountain, its stone figures frozen mid-dance. Once, water had flowed from their hands in cascading streams, sparkling in the sunlight. Now, the fountain was dry, its basin cracked and empty, the statues coated in grime and neglect. Children no longer played here, and the elders avoided it altogether, their gazes heavy with memories they refused to speak of. Eryndor, the youngest prince of Edralis, sat on the edge of the fountain, his fingers idly tracing the worn carvings beneath him. He was a slender young man of 18, his frame wiry from years of sword training, and his sandy brown hair perpetually disheveled. There was a restlessness about him, a fire in his blue-gray eyes that refused to be extinguished, despite the decay surrounding him. He stared at the fountain, lost in thought. It was said that this very fountain had once been the heart of Edralis' joy, a place where lovers met and festivals began. Now, it was a relic of better days, a bitter reminder of what had been lost. "Eryndor," came a voice from behind, soft yet firm. "You shouldn't linger there." The prince turned to see Liana, the steward's daughter, approaching him. She wore an emerald cloak, its edges frayed from years of use, and her dark curls framed a face that was far too serious for her 17 years. She crossed her arms, her sharp green eyes narrowing at him. "And why not?" Eryndor asked, though he already knew what she would say. Liana glanced around, her posture tense. "You know the stories. They say the curse began here." "The curse," Eryndor muttered, his voice laced with skepticism. "Everyone talks about it, but no one knows what it is." Liana sat beside him, her boots scraping against the mossy stone. "That's the point, isn't it? It's not something you see. It's something you feel. It's in the silence, the shadows, the way the sun doesn't shine here like it used to." Eryndor looked at her, his brow furrowed. "And you believe that?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the cracked basin of the fountain. I don't know what to believe, but I know something is wrong. Crops are failing, animals are disappearing, and the people are scared. They've been scared for years, Eryndor replied, his tone dismissive. The kingdom's been in decline since before I was born. It's easier to blame a curse than admit we've failed. Lyanna's expression hardened. This isn't just a decline, Eryndor. My father says he's seen shadows moving in the Great Hall, even when the torches are lit. And the forest. Eryndor straightened. What about the forest? Lyanna glanced around, as if afraid someone might overhear. 3 hunters went in last week. Only one came back. He said they found an abandoned village buried in mist, and something moved in the fog. Something that wasn't human. Eryndor felt a chill run down his spine. The forest had always been a source of life for Edralis, its game and timber sustaining the kingdom through harsh winters. If it was no longer safe, I'll go, he said suddenly, rising to his feet. Lyanna grabbed his arm. Don't be ridiculous. If trained hunters couldn't face whatever's out there, what makes you think you can? Eryndor met her gaze, his voice steady. Because someone has to. If we sit here and do nothing, Edralis will crumble into nothing but ruins and ghost stories. The decision was made. By nightfall, Eryndor was in the stables, saddling his horse. The lanterns cast long shadows across the stone walls, their flickering light dancing like specters. The scent of hay and leather filled the air, mingling with the faint metallic tang of the sword strapped to his side. He had prepared quickly, but thoroughly. A satchel of bread and dried meat, a flask of water, and a sturdy cloak to ward off the autumn chill. The hunter's tale lingered in his mind, but he pushed the fear aside. Fear had no place in a prince's heart, he told himself. You're really going through with this? Lyanna's voice echoed through the stable, startling him. Eryndor turned to see her standing in the doorway, her cloak pulled tightly around her shoulders. She held a small satchel in her hands, which she extended toward him. You didn't come to stop me, did you? He asked, taking the satchel. No, she admitted. I came to make sure you don't starve out there. Eryndor smiled faintly, his fingers brushing against hers as he took the bag. Thank you. Just promise me you'll come back, she said, her voice softer now. Because if you don't, I'll find a way to drag you back and kill you myself. He chuckled, the sound echoing in the quiet stable. I promise. Without another word, he mounted his horse and rode into the night. Lyanna watched him until the darkness swallowed him whole, her heart heavy with unspoken fears. The road to the forest was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of nocturnal life, crickets, owls, the rustle of leaves, were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. The full moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting long, ghostly shadows across the path. Eryndor dismounted at the forest's edge, tying his horse to a sturdy tree. The air here was colder, and the ground was blanketed in a thick, unnatural mist. He tightened his grip on his sword, its hilt cool against his palm. The trees loomed tall and foreboding, their gnarled branches intertwining like the fingers of giants. As he stepped into the woods, the mist curled around his boots, muffling his footsteps. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of branches swaying in the wind. He walked for what felt like hours, the forest growing darker and denser with each step. The trees seemed to close in around him, their bark blackened as if scorched. Strange symbols were carved into the trunks, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. A sudden rustle to his left made him freeze. He turned sharply, his sword raised, but the mist obscured his vision. His heart pounded in his chest as he strained to see. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. For a moment there was no response. Then a figure emerged from the shadows. It was cloaked in tattered black fabric, its face hidden beneath a hood. Its presence radiated cold, a chill that seeped into Eryndor's bones. "You should not be here," the figure said, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to echo all around him. Eryndor tightened his grip on his sword. "And why is that?" The figure tilted its head, as if amused. "Because this is not your kingdom anymore." Before Eryndor could respond, the figure dissolved into the mist, leaving behind only an eerie silence. The forest seemed to grow darker, the air heavier. Taking a deep breath, Eryndor forced himself to move forward. Whatever curse had befallen Edralis, he would find its source. And if the kingdom truly belonged to the darkness now, he would be the one to bring back the light. The dense mist curled around Eryndor as he ventured deeper into the forest, each step weighed down by the oppressive silence. The trees stood like sentinels, their ancient bark carved with glowing runes that pulsed faintly in the darkness. The whispers he had heard from the villagers now seemed tangible, as if the forest itself were alive, observing his every move. Eryndor tightened his grip on his sword. His breathing was steady, but his mind was a storm of questions. What had that figure meant when it said this was no longer his kingdom? Was the curse tied to the forest? Or was it merely another symptom of something larger, something older? The mist thickened, and the faint silver light of the moon barely penetrated the dense canopy above. He paused, straining his ears. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat. Then, faintly, he heard it, a whisper, soft and fleeting, as though carried on the wind. "Eryndor," his name. He froze, his chest tightening. He turned slowly, his sword raised, his eyes scanning the darkness. The whisper came again, closer this time, almost intimate. "Eryndor, you cannot save them." He took a step back, his boots crunching against the dry leaves. The air grew colder, and the glow of the runes on the trees brightened, casting eerie shadows that danced across the mist. "Show yourself," he demanded, his voice firm despite the unease gnawing at him. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a flicker of shadow darting between the trees. He spun toward it, his sword ready, but the figure disappeared into the mist. A chill ran down his spine as he realized the whispers weren't coming from one source, but many, surrounding him, pressing in like invisible hands. "You've come too far," a voice hissed, deeper and more menacing than the others. "Turn back, or you will join the Forgotten." Eryndor gritted his teeth. "I will not turn back. If this is where the curse began, then this is where I'll end it." the whispers fell silent, replaced by a low, guttural growl that seemed to rise from the very ground beneath him. The mist parted, revealing a clearing bathed in an otherworldly blue light. At its center stood a massive stone altar, covered in vines and glowing runes. Around it were the remnants of what once must have been a village: collapsed huts, rotting wood, and broken pottery scattered across the ground. Eryndor approached cautiously, his sword at the ready. The air was heavy with magic, a power so ancient and raw that it made his skin prickle. As he stepped closer to the altar, he noticed something strange. The runes weren't just glowing, they were shifting, rearranging themselves into patterns that seemed almost alive. He reached out, his fingers hovering above the surface of the stone. The air around him buzzed with energy, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "Beware." Before he could react, the ground beneath him trembled, and a shadow rose from the altar, coalescing into a form both terrifying and familiar. It was the figure from before, but now its cloak was torn and its face was visible, a hollow void where eyes and a mouth should have been, swirling with black mist. "You cannot undo what has been done," it intoned, its voice echoing with 1,000 others. "This kingdom is lost." Eryndor stepped back, his sword raised defensively. "Who are you? What are you?" "I am the Warden of Shadows," it replied. "I guard the secrets of this land, secrets that should never be disturbed." Eryndor's mind raced. The Warden was no mere phantom. It was something born of the curse, tied to the very fabric of Edralis. "Why is the kingdom cursed?" he demanded. "What happened here?" The Warden laughed, a sound that sent shivers down Eryndor's spine. "You seek answers, but you will find only despair. The curse was born of greed, of betrayal, of blood spilled beneath the moon. Your ancestors sowed the seeds of their own destruction." Before Eryndor could press further, the Warden raised an arm, and the mist around him surged, forming tendrils that lashed out like living things. Eryndor dodged, his sword slicing through the air. The tendrils recoiled, but the Warden only grew stronger, its shadowy form expanding, consuming the light of the runes. Eryndor fought fiercely, his movements swift and precise. He deflected the shadowy attacks, his blade glowing faintly as if imbued with some latent magic. But for every strike he landed, the Warden seemed to regenerate, its form reconstituting itself from the darkness. "You cannot defeat me," it hissed. "You fight the very essence of the curse." Eryndor's breath came in ragged gasps. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever. His eyes darted to the altar, where the runes still pulsed and shifted. There had to be a connection, a way to use the altar's power against the Warden. Summoning his courage, he made a dash for the altar, dodging the Warden's attacks as they came. The moment his hand touched the stone, a surge of energy shot through him, and the runes flared with brilliant light. The Warden shrieked, its form destabilizing as the light spread through the clearing. "Foolish boy," it cried, its voice a cacophony of rage and pain. "You do not know what you've unleashed." The light intensified, and the Warden dissolved into mist, its screams fading into silence. Eryndor fell to his knees, his chest heaving as the altar's glow dimmed. The clearing was silent once more, but the air felt different, lighter, as if the forest itself had exhaled. He looked around, his gaze falling on the ruins of the village. The shadows were gone, but their presence lingered, etched into the broken walls and scattered remains. Whatever he had done, it wasn't the end of the curse. It was only the beginning. As Eryndor rose to his feet, a new sound reached his ears, the soft crunch of footsteps on the forest floor. He turned sharply, his sword ready, but the figure that emerged from the trees was no enemy. It was an old woman, her face lined with age and her eyes sharp and knowing. She wore a tattered cloak and leaned heavily on a gnarled staff, but there was a strength in her posture that belied her frailty. "You are braver than most," she said, her voice steady and calm. "But bravery alone will not save your kingdom." Eryndor lowered his sword slightly, his brow furrowing. "Who are you?" "I am a keeper of knowledge," she replied, "and I know the truth of the curse you seek to break." Eryndor stepped closer, his exhaustion giving way to determination. "Tell me, what must I do?" The old woman's gaze was piercing. "The curse is bound to the blood of your family. To undo it, you must face the sins of your ancestors and make a choice that will determine the fate of Edralis." Eryndor swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. "And if I fail?" She smiled faintly, a sad, knowing smile. "Then your kingdom will join the countless others lost to history, its name whispered only in tales of caution and regret." Before he could ask more, the woman turned and disappeared into the trees, her figure fading like a shadow in the mist. Eryndor stood alone in the clearing, the altar's faint glow casting long shadows around him. He knew now that his journey was far from over. The answers he sought lay ahead, hidden in the darkness of his family's past, and the depths of the curse that had claimed Edralis. With a deep breath, he sheathed his sword and began the long trek back to the castle. Whatever trials awaited him, he would face them head-on. For his kingdom, for its people, and for the light that still burned within the shadows. Eryndor returned to Edralis just as dawn broke over the crumbling towers of the castle. The sight of his home, bathed in the soft orange light of morning, should have brought him comfort, but instead, it only deepened the weight on his chest. The knowledge that the curse was bound to his blood, to his family's sins, gnawed at him like a festering wound. His thoughts were a storm of questions. What had his ancestors done to bring this darkness upon Edralis? And what would it demand of him to lift it? The gates of the castle creaked open as he approached, and the familiar voice of Liana broke the silence. "Eryndor!" she called, her footsteps rushing toward him. He turned to see her running down the stone steps, her cloak billowing behind her. Her face was a mixture of relief and anger. "You're alive," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you have any idea how foolish that was?" "I didn't have a choice," he replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "The curse. It's tied to my family, to me." Liana's expression softened as she studied his face. "What did you find?" He hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. "The forest. It's alive with something ancient and dark. A shadow called the Warden guards its secrets. It said the curse was born of greed, betrayal, and bloodshed. My ancestors are the reason Edralis is dying. Liana's eyes widened. Then how do we stop it? Eryndor shook his head. I don't know yet, but there's more. An old woman appeared. She called herself a keeper of knowledge. She said I must face the sins of my ancestors and make a choice that will decide the fate of the kingdom. Liana was silent for a moment, her gaze searching his. Whatever it takes, we'll do it together. Eryndor's first step was to uncover the truth about his ancestors. The old woman's words echoed in his mind. The sins of your ancestors. He knew the castle held secrets, hidden in its archives and vaults, long buried by time and neglect. That evening, Eryndor and Liana descended into the lower levels of the castle, their torches casting flickering light against the cold stone walls. The air grew damp and heavy as they approached the iron door that led to the king's vault, a chamber forbidden to all but the royal family. You're sure about this? Liana asked, her voice low. Eryndor nodded. If the truth is anywhere, it's here. The key, handed down through generations of kings, hung around his neck. He slid it into the rusted lock, and with a groan, the door creaked open to reveal a room filled with ancient relics, scrolls, and tomes. Dust hung in the air, disturbed only by their cautious steps. Liana moved to the shelves, her fingers brushing against faded scrolls. What exactly are we looking for? Anything that explains the curse, Eryndor said, his eyes scanning the room. He moved to a pedestal in the center, where a large weathered book lay open. The pages were brittle, but the ink was still legible. He began to read, his heart sinking with every word. The book told the story of Edralis' founding, a tale of ambition and conquest. His ancestors had waged war against neighboring kingdoms, driven not by necessity, but by greed. They had stolen sacred relics, desecrated holy sites, and betrayed their allies to expand their rule. But the worst was yet to come. Eryndor's voice faltered as he read aloud. On the night of the blood moon, the first king of Edralis, Eldarion, made a pact with the spirits of the forest. He promised them peace and protection, but when the harvest failed, he broke his word. He ordered the forest burned, its sacred groves destroyed. The spirits cursed him and his bloodline, vowing that Edralis would fall into ruin until the debt was repaid. Liana's hand flew to her mouth. That's it. That's the source of the curse. Eryndor closed the book, his jaw tightening. And now it's up to me to repay that debt. The next night, under the light of a rising blood moon, Eryndor and Liana returned to the forest. The air was heavy with magic, the runes on the trees glowing brighter than before. The path seemed to guide them, drawing them back to the altar. The clearing was bathed in the crimson light of the moon, the altar's runes pulsating like a heartbeat. Eryndor placed his hand on the stone, and the forest seemed to respond, the air vibrating with energy. What now? Liana whispered. Eryndor hesitated. The curse is tied to my family's blood. If I'm to break it, I need to offer something in return. Your blood? Liana's voice was sharp with fear. Eryndor, no. There has to be another way. There isn't, he said firmly. My ancestors made this mess. It's my responsibility to fix it." Before Liana could protest further, the shadows began to stir. The warden emerged from the mist, its hollow form towering over them. "You return," it said, its voice a cold rasp. "Have you come to make amends, child of Aldarion?" Eryndor stood tall, his sword at his side. "I've come to end the curse." The warden laughed, the sound echoing through the clearing. "And what will you offer in return? Blood was spilled to bind this curse. Blood must be spilled to break it." Eryndor drew his sword, the blade catching the light of the moon. "Then take it." "No." Liana stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "There has to be another way." The warden tilted its head, as if considering her words. "There is," it said slowly. "The curse may be broken by restoring what was taken, a life for a life." "What does that mean?" Eryndor demanded. The warden extended a shadowy arm toward the altar. "The spirits of the forest demand a champion to guard their sacred lands. Give yourself to the forest, and the curse will be lifted. But know this, you will never leave." Eryndor's heart pounded. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical force. He looked at Liana, her eyes wide with fear and desperation. "There's no other choice," he said quietly. Liana shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Eryndor, please, don't do this." He turned to the warden. "I accept." The warden raised its arms, and the runes on the altar flared with blinding light. The forest seemed to come alive, the trees swaying and whispering as the magic took hold. Eryndor felt the energy envelop him, pulling him into the fabric of the forest itself. As the light faded, Liana fell to her knees, her sobs breaking the silence. The clearing was empty, save for the faint glow of the runes and the soft rustle of the trees. Eryndor was gone, but the forest felt different, lighter, freer. The curse was broken, but at a cost. Liana returned to Edralis alone, her heart heavy with grief. The villagers noticed the change immediately. The air felt cleaner, the crops greener. The curse was gone. But Liana couldn't forget the price they had paid. Every time she looked toward the forest, she felt his presence there, a part of the land he had given everything to save. And deep within the forest, under the light of a new moon, a figure stood by the altar. His form was cloaked in shadows, his eyes glowing faintly. Eryndor was no longer a prince, but a guardian, bound to the forest for eternity. The curse was lifted, and Edralis began to heal. But the tale of the forgotten kingdom would live on, a reminder of the cost of greed and the power of redemption. As the tale of Eryndor's courageous journey through the cursed lands of Edralis draws to a close, let this story remind us of the resilience that lies within even the most burdened of hearts, and the power of truth to illuminate the darkest shadows. Remember, my fellow adventurers, that even when faced with the weight of ancient sins and the trials of the unknown, the strength of determination and the willingness to sacrifice can restore hope and harmony. Thank you for joining me tonight. Until next time. May your dreams be filled with the whispers of ancient forests, the flicker of glowing runes, and the promise of new tales waiting to be told. Good night.